Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and of course, with me as always is Ken. How are you today, Ken?
I'm exceptionally grateful to be here, Rory. This is episode 152. You have tuned in to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, and we're honoured, privileged to have you here. In today's episode, we're going to be covering three different topics, starting off with how different theories view mental health. That's going to be a good one there, and that is for whether you are a student, qualified counsellor. There's going to be something in there for you, and a super duper handout which we'll tell you about in a mo. Then we're going to check in with CPCAB, where Rory, you spoke with Ray Thunderpool, and the subject that you spoke about was adding those CBT skills onto your practice.
Absolutely, Ken. This is about progression and adding some other tools into your toolbox if you feel you need another set of tools. So Ray outlines why adding CBT skills can be a useful idea.
Looking forward to that check-in. And then we end episode 152 by dipping our toe into practice with our section Practice Matters, where we're going to look at attachment theory. Such an important topic. We could probably do a whole podcast on that, but I look forward to when we get there. So let's kick off episode 152, how different theories view mental health. Over to you, Rory.
Well, thank you very much, Ken. And this is a question that comes up time and time again. It's on some awarding bodies' criteria, and it also comes up in our Facebook page. And if you're not on our Facebook page, if you go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor, you'll find us. We're a closed group, but knock on the door. We'll open the door up for you, come in, and you can join thousands of like-minded people. There are therapists, there are supervisors, there are tutors, and talking about the world of counselling and psychotherapy. Really useful, supportive groups, so pop in there. But one of the questions gets asked is, how does different theories conceptualize mental health? So let me be clear about what mental health is in this term, and that is maybe depression or anxiety, or just not feeling yourself. And different theories would have different views on why people come to that place. And I'm going to touch a little bit on the three main theories. Psychodynamic, which is the work of Freud. Freudians would say that the reason that people feel distressed or depressed or anxious is because of subconscious processes. So the big thing about Freud is he believed we're driven by subconscious processes and also sexual drives, that part of our development was drive theory. He did a big piece on psychosexual developments in children, and he believed that any difficulty we had was because our subconscious was driving us in that direction. And part of therapy was to unlock the subconscious, to be analysed, if you like, so that we could understand our own processes. So that is a very brief overview of psychodynamic. It's in contrast, really, to person-centred therapy that says that we get distressed because of incongruence. In other words, who we are and who we show to the world are at odds. And there's a bit of a collision or a bit of a bump with that. And that can make us feel, uncomfortable at the very low end of things, but, in the very intense end of things, depressed or anxious. And it's about conditions of worth and introjected values. In other words, living to other people's expectations. And certainly, that as a person-centered therapist, I see that a lot in my practice where clients come, and the reason they're feeling down or they're feeling anxious is because they have to do things for other people and they're not being themselves. And the whole part of person-centered theory is kind of self-development and being able, to be yourself and to take care of yourself. And it's, again, that is quite different to cognitive behavioural therapy, which would say that our mental distress is caused by irrational or faulty thinking. And CBT therapists would say the reason that we have difficulties is because our thought processes, and I'm talking in a very general term here, each one of these is an hour's lecture, our mental processes, our thoughts are at odds, and we have to work through faulty thinking and test out our faulty thinking. So a very easy one, and I mentioned this on the podcast before. I'm sure that everybody's looking at me. And, one experiment a CBT therapist may do is to say to a client, go out, have a look in a shop window, when people could go out and about, of course, have a look in a shop window, see the reflection of people walking by, and are people looking at you? And most people would look at the window, or I think a majority of people would look in the window, see the reflection either side, see people getting on with the business, and realize that people weren't looking at them. So it's about testing out faulty thinking. So very briefly, those are the three main perspectives and how they view mental health. And I'm going to give a handout for this. So if you go to counsellingtutor.com and you find the podcast tab and you go to 152, you'll find this podcast, and also you'll find a handout which is going to be called how counselling theories conceptualize mental health. Just download it, it'll come to your inbox, and that will answer the questions on just how different approaches see kind of how, if we're mentally unwell or emotionally unwell. That's going to be really, really useful.
It is useful. I know that during studies we're often called to compare and contrast different models or modalities of therapy, and of course there's some material there in that handout that Rory has created that you can kind of weave in, and maybe you can kind of think of the modalities that you might be studying. You might be studying transactional analysis, and then you can kind of look what might cause the distress in transactional analysis. And we're talking about, of course, the adult, child and parent ego states. So you would adapt that to your theory. And the one thing that comes up for me, Rory, is how different those kind of ways of thinking are, yet at the same time, how, if you kind of really boil them down, how similar they become at the end of the day. And I'm a person-centered therapist, introjected values, conditions of worth, living to the values of others, not really showing that incongruence that you speak of, Rory, where I feel one way inside. Inside, I might be feeling fearful or down or low, yet outside I will be, hello everybody, I'm fine. And that incongruence. Why? Because if I show my true self, then I will not be accepted by others. And that's where the work lies, in kind of looking at that incongruence, challenging the incongruence, walking with that client through the incongruence as they find their own truth and realize that their own true self is more than good enough. So I guess that's just my view on person-centered, which is where I spent my study time. Rory, you have more of an academic knowledge of course, the other modalities, and that's why you kind of created that amazing handout for everyone. Yeah,
and you are right, Ken, because TA, transactional analysis, would see our difficulties maybe in our early life scripts. And, as my good friend Bob Cook says on many occasions, let's get a new script on the road. So, the transactional analysis community would see that, some of our behavior and our views and some of our distresses are encapsulated in our childhood. And the script we write, in other words, a little script that we play out through life. And part of it, being a TA therapist is to help clients go back, to look at the script, and then to rewrite it and put a new script on the road. So yes, they all have their own unique view of mental health. However, as you quite rightly say, Ken, there is some similarities. If you look deep enough, you'll find that there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah. And I guess there's those similarities, but when we look into the differences, if we look to the first modality you spoke about, Freudian thinkers would speak about that subconscious thought processes that are going on, that we have no control over. They are just happening. They're almost driving us, and we are unaware of them. Whereas we go to person-centered, and it would be the incongruence is there, and we're kind of aware of it. We might need it it may be on the edge of awareness, but it is sitting in awareness. So we see the differences, yet the similarities kind of bubbling up there.
Yeah, absolutely right. And you are right, Ken. They do come from different perspectives. Freudian thinking comes really from a medical model. It kind of finds itself. Freud was a neurologist by training, so that's really a medical kind of idea. Certainly, in terms of drive theory, person-centered is philosophical. It bases itself in phenomenology and to some extent an existential view of the world. And cognitive behavioral is based on science. It's based on testing. It's based on checking out the facts. So they come from different kind of academic disciplines as well, which I think is really interesting. So that could be something that's put in assignments, the medical, the philosophical, and of course a more scientific approach.
So interesting, isn't it? The study, the continued study, I guess, of the human condition, from philosophy into science, into, I guess, at some stages, conjecture of what that may be. And we're learning more and more, and the research is showing us more and more. What's interesting is the link between our first topic, which is kind of looking at those different models, and we're looking at the differences, the similarities, speaking about that. And we're now going into kind of our check-in with CPCAB, where Ray spoke with you about kind of adding CBT, which you've mentioned now, that kind of more scientific approach to your base modality, which might be person-centered. And it's interesting how they can work together if used correctly, if the study is done correctly in service of the client. So you checked in with CPCAB, you spoke with Ray. What came out of that?
Well, as we'll hear, Ray talks about adding another string to your bow. Those are his words, and those are my words, not his. But yes, CBT is a recognized model of therapy, and some therapists like to have a different model. Remember, as I've always said, it's best fit for clients, and some clients may better fit a CBT approach. And he spoke about how you can train to be a CBT therapist.
Well, let's check in with CPCAB.
Check in with CPCAB.
And we welcome Ray van der Poel from CPCAB, who's going to be talking about why add a CBT qualification to your qualification portfolio. It's an interesting question and one that gets asked quite a lot, Ray.
Yeah, hi Rory. Really good to be on the podcast. Why add CBT? Well, there's lots of reasons for that. I think once you have settled into your own approach as a counsellor, so I'll be talking a little bit about once you have achieved at least a level 4 diploma, then do you go on and do some extra further training, discounting obviously. Continuing professional development, for instance. But CPCAB recognized a few years ago now that actually a good addition to somebody's counseling might be to add CBT as an extra string to your bow, something that you could use with various different clients, because clients have different needs. And actually what works for one client doesn't necessarily work for another. So I think CBT, it's nice recognized. So if you were looking for employment within, for example, the NHS, then it would be a good string to your bow. It would be another reason why you might be successful in that interview process.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point that one size of therapy doesn't fit all clients, and some clients may come with CBT-shaped issues that specifically would be better worked on. They're not phenomenological issues, things like maybe anxiety or phobias or fears of doing something. And CBT can be an incredibly effective intervention for that.
Yeah, and I think actually now that you've said that integration into your own approach, the qualification that CBT have designed is a qualification that puts CBT into your current practice. So this is about, how do I integrate CBT into my practice? We're just about to release a new CBT DVD alongside that would sit alongside the qualification. But the really interesting part of the DVD is it shows how CBT is not a in the past, it's always been looked at as a very directive approach without the relationship, but that simply just isn't true. CBT was never designed without the relationship in mind. And I think what we need to understand is that whatever therapeutic intervention we use is going to have the relationship at its heart. And that includes working in a person-centered psychodynamic CBT approach. And what I would hope that practitioners that are interested in adding extra skills other than their core approach is that they see the benefit of that they see the benefit of being able to offer the client a different type of intervention, but still holding on to that therapeutic relationship.
Absolutely, Ray, and there's been lots of research, over the years about, and one of the terms that comes up is common factors, where
Yes.
they talk about, or it's talked about, that the actual modality of therapy is about 15% of the curative element of a counselling engagement, and a good part of the rest of it is the therapeutic alliance and being able to repair any ruptures. So I think you make a really good point, because I think that CBT does get a bad press. It's seen as kind of directive and a bit cold and a bit harsh, but the reality is that it can be very effective if it's underpinned by, Rogers' 6 conditions or any kind of relational theory that a student might have studied before they take a CBT course.
Yeah, and when you talk like that, I myself as a practitioner, I was person-centered, and I got into a situation where I was working within a university setting, and they said, "Oh, can you deliver a CBT module?" And I thought, I best go and do a course on CBT before I do that. And I went into the course, and I had all of those fears about, this is going to take me away from my approach. I'm not going to be able to integrate this. How do I teach something that I really just don't believe in? And it was the complete opposite experience that I had. The person that was presenting the CBT, they were probably the most humanistic therapist that I have met. And it soon became very apparent that actually any of the interventions and the tasks in CBT just don't work without a relationship. And it was very clear after that I thought, actually, this is something that I can add to my practice, and that it's going to add something rather than take away.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And we are moving in a world now of theoretical integration, where people are integrating maybe 2 different modalities they've trained in, and I come back again to the main point that it's the best fit for the client. There's an ethical issue, I think, about using a modality that doesn't fit for the presentation.
Yeah, and all those factors that you were talking about, but there's therapist factors and there's client factors as well. So it works both ways. It's a relationship, and if you want somebody to come back, you need to understand how they would like to work.
Yes. Well, it kind of links into the kind of the idea of pluralism, doesn't it? That you create a negotiated environment with your client, and they tell you what they want, and you try to accommodate their needs. That is a healthy therapeutic relationship in my book.
Yeah, and that runs from the contracting right through to ending in the relationship. It just is something that is always there, and you need to always keep that contact with the person. You need to review how things are going all the time, and not get caught in this your approach bubble, where you don't deviate from how you work with somebody, I think is really important.
Yes, I agree with that, and although training it as someone who studied the work of Rogers still does, he's a very engulfing character. A lot of people almost see his therapy and his way of thinking as almost like a kind of religious zeal. And Rogers himself, I think, if he was around today, would have been terribly excited about the new developments of therapy. And from what I understand of reading about the guy for 15 years, I think he would have embraced this idea of using the relationship, but using maybe a different toolbox to help people. He changed his view on person-centered therapy through the years as well, which indicates that he developed his ideas.
Yeah, something that is more client-centered, and that's what we're talking about. Something that revolves around the client, not just doing something to somebody. I think he'd be horrified personally if we were doing things to our clients. But work with the client. I think coming back to the CBT and why it's important to do something sort of additional on top of your base training. I think that it besides giving you loads of different options, it's always something that you can hold in the back of your mind as well. It's not something you necessarily have to act on. And I think when people do additional training, it doesn't mean that you have to use it all the time. Although having personal experience of doing various different types of training, then all of a sudden that's what you want to do in your therapeutic practice, until the freshness sort of integrates into your practice. But I think it just having any sort of additional learning in the back of your mind is always going to give you something as a practitioner to reflect on after the session, something, some more knowledge, some more, so that you have even if I use the term, a more holistic approach to how you support that person and help that person. I've done quite a lot of, I've taught psychology before, so I've got the benefit of holding on to those theories that underpin behavior in certain ways. And that is invaluable. You can still hold on to your core approach and just have this information sitting there secondary.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And there are some presentations, working with people in recovery from substance misuse, which really do favour a more structured approach, which CBT has at its root. It's a more structured approach. So how long is a CBT course run for? Is it 2 years, or how long would it typically run for?
No, it's, well, we don't govern how long a provider will actually do the course for, but it's 120 guided learning hours, and the total qualification time is 388 hours, and that is normally done over the space of a year or maybe 2 years, but it shouldn't really be longer than that. It is an additional course so it's not going to be the same as your level 4 diploma, which is generally 2 years part-time. So the course is designed to help you integrate CBT into your practice, but also to give you the foundations of CBT as well. So you have a really good understanding about how cognitively you can work with somebody, how behaviorally you can work with somebody. And certainly even when you do a therapeutic approach without those two parts, they're inescapable. They happen anyway, because in between therapy, people have a life. They go out, they behave in certain ways, they think in certain ways. What CBT does is it supports somebody in having a plan to test things out, essentially. So you might have, if somebody had a social phobia, you might test out ways of thinking while you're in that situation, or you might, stretch those boundaries of how comfortable you feel in that situation. And that would happen in normal person-centered therapy in the form of maybe socialization, mediation, something like that. But this is a more structured way. I'll never forget. I've just thought of something. I'll share something with you. The trainer in the first CBT course that I did, he said that he had this client that was convinced that that people in the forces hated him, and he was from the forces himself, but he just had this belief, and I think CBT is very good at managing and tackling beliefs, and he had to do a behavioral experiment. This was part of his homework, and the person went with him into a town centre that was that had a lot of service people that lived there. And he gave him a clipboard and he said, okay, so go up to the complete strangers and ask them questions around what they think of you and if they've been in the forces before. And it became so apparent that as the day was going on, this person's belief was physically changing in front of the therapist's eyes, because he was beginning to understand that his reality in his mind was not the reality that he was experiencing. And I think that is hugely beneficial for people, is once you get in that situation where you're gently challenged on your beliefs around what you feel is happening or what you think is happening and what is actually happening, that is just so powerful.
I totally agree, and reality testing is a big part of CBT. I remember from my own practice when I was a school counsellor, having a client who believed everybody was looking at them. And I said, well, next time you go into town and go to Primark, because this person liked Primark, I said, just look in the window, but instead of looking at the clothes, just look at the people walking past in the reflection and see if they're looking at you. And the next week, it was like, no one's looking at me. And I said, there you go, that's your evidence. And that was it. It was 2 sessions and job done.
Yeah, and I think evidence is really important within CBT as a framework, and how you work with somebody, and whether you keep a feelings behavior diary, or there's many different tasks and things that you can do, but it is about gathering evidence, and some people need that. Some people need to be faced with something that is external from what's going on inside.
Well, Ray, I think that's been a really good little journey into the world of CBT. I think you've given some really compelling reasons why someone might want to add that skill set to their portfolio. And as always, Ray, thank you so much for joining us.
Check-in with CPCAB is proudly sponsored by CPCAB, the only awarding body run by counsellors for counsellors. To learn more about CPCAB qualifications and to get more detailed information on today's podcast topic, visit cpcab.co.uk.
Always love hearing Ray speak, and he spoke so eloquently about adding another string to your bow, about becoming a kind of more eclectic therapist by using a different technique. And of course, it's a level 5 qualification, so that raises your qualification level up and your overall qualification portfolio. So if you're on the cusp of graduating and you think, well, maybe I'd be interested in doing something else, getting a CBT qualification may very, very, very well be useful, not only to yourself, but of course in service of your clients.
Thank you very much for that. So moving now swiftly on to practice matters, where we take an element of practice, something that we might see within our day-to-day running of a practice or in a client's presentation. And today we're looking at a topic that comes up so often. It comes up so often in supervision, in speaking with supervisees. This topic would come up often, and that is, of course, attachment theory, Rory.
Absolutely. And what I would say is that every qualified therapist should have a good working knowledge of attachment, because it presents in the therapy room, well, in my experience, 9 times out of 10. And Donald Winnicott was a British psychoanalyst and paediatrician, and he had his own view of child development, and he coined the phrase the good enough mother. And what he was really saying is, and this is something that we've known for a long, long time, is that some clients don't have the parenting they should have had as children. And it leaves, for want of a better phrase, and I don't like using this word, a deficit. It leaves a hole, an emotional hole. And they carry it through life. And that could be very painful. And it can play out in relationships, the relationship they have with other people, but also what's called the intrapsychic relationship, which is the relationship you have with yourself. And at the extreme end of things, it can lead to a borderline personality disorder where people just don't feel connected to themselves. And the reason for that is that early parenting helps the child connect. And, you know, I think it was Winnicott who said something along the lines of there's no child and mother, they're one, you know. I've just had a new, at the time of recording, Isabel, our grandchild's in the world. She's only 3 weeks old. And you can see that she is connected to mum. She's absolutely connected to, and in Gestalt terms, that's called confluence, where the child doesn't know where mum begins and the child ends. And as part of developing the child's personality and ego is about allowing them to make mistakes and allowing them to kind of be frustrated. Children are frustrated, and for the parent to be a consistent object. And if that doesn't happen in childhood, it happens in the therapy room. And I've always believed that we are the good enough other. As therapists, we're the good enough other, and we can use ourselves to help fill that void left by probably not very good or inadequate parenting. And I've seen it in action. And having an understanding of attachment theory, whether it's Bowlby or Winnicott, is really, really useful. And I'm sure in your practice, Ken, you know, and you can't speak specifically, obviously, but there are times when you have been that good enough other, that consistent object in the therapy room to allow the client to complete themselves.
And I think it's kind of a role that a therapist plays in somebody that is consistent, somebody that is constant, somebody that is congruent. And I think in life in general, those are difficult to find. So being that good enough other is about, I guess, being what is not often seen, being the deficit maybe that the person is experiencing in their life. But it all starts with personal development from a therapist's point of view. I mean, you led into this, Rory, saying that every therapist should understand attachment theory. And the reason for this is not necessarily so that we can see it in our clients, although of course that is so important. But number one is so that we can see it in ourselves. So we can understand what our attachment style is. Because an attachment style, although we may develop, although we may find ways to kind of not be stuck or react from our attachment style, at times of stress, we will default back to our attachment style. And we can find it playing out in therapy almost invisible to us, because your attachment style plays out invisibly. You don't see it. You don't put something out there and go, oh, there's my attachment style. Unless, of course, you're journaling, reflecting, you might catch that. Again, that's why it's so important in supervision, that a supervisor should be looking out for that and understand what a supervisee's attachment style is. And of course, the next step of that is learning and being able to see that within a client, understanding their attachment style to be able to work with what would be best fit for them. And of course, Rory, if anybody is wondering how they can learn about attachment style, we have a lecture that Rory did on attachment. It's actually Winnicott's attachment theory, and that is in our CPD library for qualified practitioners, but it is also in our student library because it is so important. Although it is not maybe taught on all counselling courses, it is something that you will see, I guess, in most counselling relationships. And if you're interested in looking at our CPD library for qualified practitioners or our student library and study resources, all the information you can find on that is on counsellingtutor.com.
Yes, and just one observation. I did a child and adolescent counselling course because I, like yourself, Ken, was a counsellor in a school. And and I thought it was a good idea in a principal position to get some training specifically around working with children and young people. And I was surprised on the first day of my training course. I was sat in the room with all the other colleagues, and we all talked about our kind of practices and why we'd come to learn about child and adolescent therapy. And one person had no interest in working with children. Her practice was with adults. And I thought, I wonder why she's here. She's on the wrong course. And ignorant me, it became apparent that she was interested in how her clients had got to where they had come to. In other words, she was interested in how adults came to be themselves. And she was interested in working with clients who were regressing into a child place to be able to use interventions that you'd work with a child to help develop them, strengthen their adult ego state. And for the eagle-eyed listeners amongst you, you know I'll be talking about transactional analysis there. But what was really fascinating is I can say this without any kind of fear of contradiction from myself, is that the majority of the skills I've used through the years, because I haven't been a child therapist for a few years now, were with adults. The techniques and everything I used on that child course, I use sometimes in my practice with adults when I can see them sliding away, when they're needing support and they're needing that, as we call it now, that good enough other, that kind of person who provides stability in the therapy room. Really, really useful. And as my PT once told me, he said to me, you know, Rory, he said, all adults are stretched out kids.
Oh.
I think that's a great quote.
Oh, aren't we just? And that's kind of the base of attachment theory, really, is that we're carrying something or acting in a certain way from something that happened in childhood. And we may not, as an adult, have that link to be able to go, oh, I know what that is. So an example of that, and this is an example I enjoy using when teaching on the subject, is you picture a child. So you have a child in a home where the parents are heavy drinkers. We'll use the word alcoholics for this this example, and the child witnesses fighting and distress within the home. Promises are made to the child: we will be home at such a time. And then the child standing at the window looking out, wondering where the parents are coming home. It's now gone past the time, and the promise has not been fulfilled. They didn't come home at the time that they said. So all of these experiences, the child needs to survive. The child needs to adapt coping mechanisms that is going to get the child through these difficult, traumatic experiences. When your primary caregiver makes a promise to you and breaks that promise, then there's one of two roads that the child may take. The one road is, I can't trust anybody. I cannot trust anybody. My primary caregiver, I can't trust them. So how can I trust anybody else? Therefore, the only way I'm going to get through life is by myself. I can only trust in myself. Nobody else deserves trust. They will only let you down eventually. Even if I do give trust, I will witness this play out again and again as a script in my life as I go forward. They're just going to let you down at some stage. That's one route the child may take. The other route the child may take is, I am not deserving of the love. They're not coming back because of me. I am wrong. I'm not doing what I need to do. Other children's parents come home on time, but mine don't. What am I doing wrong in the world? I'm not okay. I need to look for my reassurance always from others. I must be broken in some way. And there are the early kind of forks in the road that take people down their various attachment styles, which we won't go into now because it's quite complex theory. Well worth visiting those lectures of Rory. And I see attachment style in my dog, Rory. Here we go. Here's a PhD research project coming on, in that my dog is still a puppy. He's a year old now. But what he'll do is he runs freely. Yay, running freely when he's off the lead. But he will go so far and so far only. and then he won't feel comfortable anymore. He needs to stop. He needs to look around and see where I am. And there's almost like an invisible string that he will only go to a certain distance. This is a form of attachment. He doesn't feel comfortable going further than that. When you look to attachment theory, you'll see how that kind of works its way in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a must-have. I used to teach attachment on the courses that I taught, even though it wasn't in the syllabus. I seem to remember I used to teach it. We used to be able to get it in somewhere. But it's really important, and it presents in the therapy room. It feels like all the time. It's probably not all the time, but attachment is, it is the basis of how we work, and understanding our role in that is so important. So what a mixed but interesting and connected set of topics today, Ken.
It is. And don't forget, before leaving this podcast, to get yourself onto counsellingtutor.com, podcasts tab, go to episode 152, go and get Rory's super duper handout on the different theories, how different theories view mental health. And if you have an interest in learning more about attachment theory, if you are a member of our counselling study resources, or a member of our CPD library as a qualified practitioner, just log in and in the search section put in attachment, and you'll find all the information we have there. And if you're not a member of those and you're interested in maybe looking at what our offer is, go to counsellingtutor.com, because all of our information is there.
Well, as I say, what a mixed, eclectic bag of topics on the podcast today. We started off on how counselling theories conceptualises mental health. We caught up with Ray van der Poel with adding CBT skills to your practice. And we finished with attachment theory and the late but great Donald Winnicott. So as always, thanks for listening. Stay grounded and stay safe.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counsellor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counsellor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counsellor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.